Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being with me. I have a very special guest here tonight. And before we bring her on, I want to talk just for a moment about what's going on in Afghanistan. This is a heartbreaking moment for this country. I think all of us seeing the views of the Kabul airport, thinking about what has happened here and the ways that it goes so much against not only what we might have been told, but our entire conception of not just this war, but so much about what America is in the world. And one of the interesting things about people who serve is that while somebody's in the service, they can't talk. And a lot of people who are journalists and so forth, who had a lot that they were thinking about, but they weren't saying it, they weren't getting printed, it couldn't be on mainstream media. And all of a sudden, Americans want to hear. All of a sudden, we're like, what just happened? What was really happening? And I know for myself, and probably for you too, some of the most interesting articles that I have read have been from veterans, have been from people who have been there, who knew what was going on. And it's so important that we know so that we stop repeating these same dramas. You know, there was a documentary a few years ago about the war in Iraq called No End in Sight by Charles Ferguson. And that movie really rocked things for me because it didn't take a perspective on whether or not we should have gone into Iraq. I was very clear we shouldn't go into Iraq. Everybody certainly is now. But what was so powerful about the movie was that it wasn't talking about whether or not we should have been there. It was talking about what a terrible job we did once we were. And I think that's what's going on right now in many ways, is that we want to know not just whether you think we should have been there or whether we shouldn't have been there, but what were we doing there and how were we doing it? And I think that's some of the most sickening stuff that people are having to confront, think about. And like I said, it's a reckoning, not just about this war, it's a reckoning about how America operates and who we really are. So I read an article by a woman that we're bringing up right now. Her name is Laura Jedeed. Laura is a writer based in New York City who focuses primarily on issues going on the far right of the political spectrum and on housing justice. She was a signals intelligence operator with the 82nd Airborne Division, who deployed to Afghanistan twice between 2008 and 2010. She also provided live coverage of Portland's 100 Nights of Protest over the summer 2020, and you can find her work at laurajedeed.com or at Laura Jedeed on Twitter. Laura, thank you so much for being with me. I'm very grateful.
Well, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Laura, you wrote an article called Afghanistan Meant Nothing that I know I posted. A lot of people, thousands and thousands of people have been retweeting it, putting it on the internet, talking about it. So I'm very grateful that you would talk to me. There are specific lines in this article that I want to ask you about. But first, I want to ask you about yourself. What made you go into the armed services to begin with?
I grew up in a household where there was a lot of Fox News, and I truly believed in the global war on terror. I thought we were bringing freedom and democracy to people. I mean, I remember, like everyone, I remember 9/11. It happened when I was 13. And I felt that same, I mean, I'm going to call it righteous anger because that's what it felt like, and that gripped America at the time. I thought that we needed to protect us from that and to go and help people that I assumed were longing to have what we had.
I understand. I'm going to read a few lines from the article, and I'd like you to tell us more about them, please. I remember Afghanistan well. I deployed there twice, once in 2008 and again in 2009, 2010. It was already obvious that the Taliban would sweep through the very instant we left, and here we are today. What made you think that?
It was, well, the thing that really, if I had to point to one thing, it would be the second deployment, when my unit was sent to train the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. And the 82nd Airborne Division doesn't know how to train anybody. The 82nd Airborne Division knows how to do exactly one thing, smashes stuff. And there were some real, challenges in training, I think, in the first place. So what my unit ended up doing was doing all the missions themselves and then saying that the Afghans did it, but with our help, like we were in support roles, and that wasn't what was happening. And I know we weren't the only unit who did that. we were basically propping up. What was happening there was us, not them. And that to me suggested that this wasn't going to work out well for us in the long term. And I mean, I had such a narrow view, right? I was in two places. I was in the East the first time, the West the second, always rural areas. But I didn't see a lot of excitement for our presence in those areas. There were, of course, people who wanted us there, people on the base who certainly said they wanted us there, but I didn't see a lot of buy-in where I was.
Other lines. I remember Afghanistan as a dusty beige nightmare of a place full of proud, brave people who did not fucking want us there. We called them Hajis and worse, and they were better than we were, braver and stronger and smarter.
I guess by the end of my deployments, I'd become very annoyed with the attitudes that America has generally towards the Afghan people. There was this idea that we were bringing them civilization, that they were backward savages, that they were, too stupid to embrace what we had brought them. And what I now believe, and this is not universal among all veterans, but these are people with very little equipment, one of the least well-equipped armies or insurgent groups on the planet, going toe-to-toe with the most technologically advanced army that's ever been, and never gave up, used anything they could. I don't know. I came to really respect that. I don't respect the things that they do. I certainly would never want to live under the Taliban. But I have to respect people who are willing to fight that hard for where they live.
Very similar to the Viet Cong in that sense.
Yes.
You tell a story in your article about someone named Cowboy. You said, I remember an Afghan kid who worked in the cafeteria who we called Cowboy. He always wore this cowboy hat and a I'm with stupid t-shirt someone had given him, always with a big smile, high school age. Cowboy was a good student. His family, who all worked on base, was incredibly proud of him. He wanted to go to college in America. But there weren't colleges that took Afghans. The education system was too shit. No program to help kids like him. I looked. I wonder if he's dead now for serving us food and dreaming of something different. You want to tell us anything about Cowboy?
I mean, that to me sums it up. He was the happiest, most enthusiastic person at that cafeteria that I remember, and just wanting something so desperately. It's been strange thinking about him so much. I haven't, because it's hard to, because we let him down so much. Why in year 7, 8, 9 of the war was there not a school system in place for someone like him? Why didn't we have programs for someone like him? You want to help a country, you train people, you give them the opportunity to bring those skills back to their country, and there was nothing for him. We spent so much money on bombs and nothing for people like him.
I think that that's really the issue that a lot of people are grappling with. It's like, what were we doing when we were there? Put aside the issue of whether we should have stayed that long, if there was any justification. But people say we shouldn't have been nation building. It seems to me the worst part is not just nation building. We were trying to build a nation in our image, as though we're doing so well. There seemed to be so little respect for the Afghan culture, so little respect for the Afghani people. I remember Robert McNamara talking about Vietnam, and this is one of the many ways in which this is all reminiscent of the Vietnam debacle. I remember years later, McNamara saying, we didn't know anything about the Vietnamese people. We didn't know about their religion. We didn't know about their culture. We didn't know anything about them, and we didn't have anyone to tell us. Now, our military could have found someone to tell them if the system wasn't so arrogant. And that's what it seems to me to be so on display here, is the bankruptcy of the model of brute force that thinks you can just go in there and kill enough people, bomb enough places, and that somehow that's going to fix it. And you have an incredible line here when you're talking about Cowboy. You say, but if Cowboy is dead, then he died a long time ago. And if Cowboy is dead, it's our fault for going in there in the first place, giving his family the option of trusting us when we are the least trustworthy people on the planet. We use people up and throw them away like it's nothing. I think, Laura, that's how people are feeling watching those scenes at the Kabul airport. It's coming up for us. If this is how we treat people now, this is how we've been treating them basically for the last 20 years.
It's almost impossible for me to watch those scenes. I've heard about the scenes of the people clinging to the aircraft, and I admit I haven't been able to watch that yet. I will. I just haven't. These are people who believed us. They believed the words that we said, and just like in Vietnam, we didn't do it, and just like in Iraq, we have a pattern of doing this, and people believe us every time, and that's the worst of it. And that's something that, I mean, even when I was over there, I have this very vivid recollection of a human intelligence operator coming in just screaming because orders had gone down on high based on his intelligence that it was gonna burn his source. They were gonna figure out who it was because he had information that he could not have gotten any other way. And this guy he was a special forces guy. This is like a hardened person, and he was as angry as I've ever seen anyone at that betrayal. And this happened all the time. And you also hit, I think it's the same flip side of the coin as the disrespect for what they want. It's this feeling that we know best and that we can make these sacrifices and we have no right.
It's the cultural imperialism. It's not just the military imperialism, it's the cultural imperialism. I want to talk to you now about the women and the boys. And one of the things that I was very aware of was the condition of women and boys in Taliban-held Afghanistan. When people say, as is such a common narrative now, it was all for nothing, I can't help feeling, but for those millions of girls and women, you know, I read books by people like Gail Lamont, dressmaker of Kirkana. I mean, this was an extraordinary thing for so many women. So it wasn't all for nothing, because those women and those girls had a life for the last 20 years that they would not have had. What are your thoughts now? What were your thoughts then? Where do you go in your own mind and heart about what this means for women and children under the Taliban?
You know, Marianne, the strange thing about that article's popularity is that, you know, I'm a writer, and usually when I write, I take notes, I do an outline, I write my thing, I send it to my friend for editing, we go back and forth, and then I publish. And this was something I wrote in 10 minutes in a fit of rage. And I meant everything I said, and I stand by it. I think in one sense, it meant nothing. I think in a way that a lot of people are feeling on an instinctual level, but I mean, I agree for the women and girls who got an education. And I hope that maybe that will be remembered. It can be a thing that's remembered, and that people will fight to have it back. That wasn't something that I experienced or saw. I was, like I said, in rural areas. I saw exactly one woman the whole time that I was deployed, and she was in a full niqab following 10 paces behind what I assume was her husband. So I didn't see that part, but I know that it existed, and I hope that made things better. I hope that gave them a chance. I hope that we didn't end up just killing them by offering them something and saying it would be forever and then having it snatched away. I don't know.
I hope that makes some veterans feel better who are tortured tonight by the thought that it was all for nothing, because for millions of people's lives, and I know there's the other side of that too, that you've been talking about, the treatment of civilians, including the deaths of many civilians. But also there were people, particularly women, who had lives that they would not have had. I talked today to the executive director of Women for Women, and she was talking about the women in Afghanistan that they work with. And she was talking about they will continue, they will move forward, and they are different. This is a different generation that the Taliban is finding now of Afghanis, and of course many of them we can only hope are different as well. We can only hope. What will you do with this now? I know that you're a writer. I know that you're in program in graduate school now at NYU, I think you said.
Yes.
How does this inform you going forward? What is your work now? You already are doing something beautiful by the truth-telling and the passion that you're bringing to your politics. But in general, what now? And what do you want us to know about who you are now and what you're going to do now?
Well, that's an interesting... I think one of the things that my time in Afghanistan gave me was empathy in a way that I hadn't really had it before. I talk in the article about finding Bollywood videos on the phones that I would search constantly. And this idea that the idea that everyone is very, very human in different ways has informed my work going forward, all of it, in ways that maybe are indirect. I do a lot of work with the far right and the rise of what I'm going to go ahead and call fascism in America and beyond. And I think I'm an anti-fascist. I think everyone should be an anti-fascist. These are things that have to be fought. But the approach that I've taken to it, and some people don't agree with this approach, is one of, why is this appealing to you? Why are people falling for this? Why are people so miserable that they're subscribing to these ideas that will lead only to misery? And in that way, I do think that all of my work is informed by some of the lessons that I learned over there.
Laura, you had said that you grew up in a family that watched Fox News, as you put it, who had a certain view of why we were in wars overseas. When you came back and your mind had changed and you saw things differently, what was that like for you and your family?
So the family thing is a little bit complicated in that we watched Fox News. My parents were, I think in the beginning, like everybody, very much for going into Afghanistan. There was some hesitation about Iraq. My parents are objectivists, which that means they're followers of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, a highly individual capitalist outlook. This is not an outlook that I share any longer, and it's caused some friction. It's something that we're working through. I love my family very much, and we just avoid certain topics. But I do think that, like a lot of people, they've realized more and more that this was a mistake. I don't think they were ever for the nation building aspect of it. Then they did not love when I joined. I listened to Fox News a little more than I listened to them.
Yeah. And by the way, for anybody who maybe doesn't remember or doesn't know the history, Iraq and Afghanistan were very different. Afghanistan was in direct response to 9/11 and al-Qaeda's presence there, going in there, routing out al-Qaeda. So the initial entrance into Afghanistan had very widespread support throughout the country. There wasn't a lot of, no, we shouldn't do it in going into Afghanistan, as opposed to Iraq, where there was huge, like, what are we doing? Saddam Hussein and Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. So the initial entrance into Afghanistan was very widely supported by people throughout the country. That was what it seemed we needed to do to rout out al-Qaeda. And then the issue was, of course, why we were staying. Now, let me ask you about your relationship with people who you served with. Obviously, you share a profound bond.
Yes. No, I've definitely kept in touch with some, not as over the years. I mean, it's been 10 years and some people have fallen off, but I definitely speak regularly to several. And the reactions have been very different. I have one friend who didn't particularly care for the article, said that his feelings were very complicated. He wasn't sure he wanted to unpack them. He was just going to feel whatever it was and move on. I had another friend who was heartbroken over the exact thing we were talking about the girls and the women that were left behind and feeling like we had done it all for nothing. I have another friend who felt the same way, just that, we spent so much of our youth training for that and fighting for it, and then for that to be nothing was heartbreaking. Still others just felt like this was the right thing to do and didn't really have a lot of emotions about it. It's just been all over the map. But I think the one thing that I think everyone's real sad about how this ended, no one wanted it to. We thought it would, but we didn't want this,
It's a kaleidoscope. There are so many conflicting truths happening at the same time. I think most Americans are ambivalent on some point, on some level. And the fact that there is so much heartbreak is part of, I think, a very natural response to it all. Do you feel that the other veterans that I know clearly you've gone on with your life in some very powerful and positive ways. Is the experience that you have of others, will they be able to get over this and move on and rebuild their lives?
I hope so. I think we're all very aware now, having been at war for 20 years, that sometimes the jump from military to civilian life is rough and not everyone makes the leap successfully. And it is, for many people, an ongoing struggle. I was lucky enough to never see combat. I have friends who were not so lucky, and some of them have struggled for years. But all you can do is just keep going. And I do think it is important to build a connection with the civilian world. You can't let this define you because, first of all, it's over. And Secondly, it's not, I don't believe, a very healthy way to live. I think you have to forge a new way of being. And a lot of my friends have been very successful at that. And I feel like I have also done that. So
does the military give enough deprogramming, as it were? We know how much programming you get to become a fighter. Do you get enough support making a reentrance into civilian life?
When I got out in 2010, there was some support. There was a class that was very helpful for me about how to build a resume and how to interview for jobs. And it was an all-day thing. You built your own resume there. They checked it. That, to me, was the most useful thing that they gave us. But there wasn't a lot of attention to mental health back then. It was really a lack. I had a friend who committed suicide in 2011 and went to the VA for help and did not receive it in a timely manner and is dead now because of it. But I am happy to say that has, at least in the VA, has changed. They've really learned that mental health is important after all these years. I get my therapy through them. I have a psychiatrist there. I think things are actually improving in the VA, and I hope that continues.
Thank you. Well, you have contributed with your article to a very important conversation. It's a very painful moment in America, but we need to be telling some radical truth right now. We need serious truth-telling, and veterans such as yourself have stories to tell us that we need to listen to. We have obviously been listening to governmental voices, military voices, who either didn't know better or knew better and told us what they told us even though it wasn't true. And now I think in this pain of this moment, people are open to hearing things that maybe we didn't even want to hear before. Not that we want to hear them now, but we know we need to. So please keep writing. Please doing what you do. It's an honor to meet you. The proverbial thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your struggle. And thank you for your truth-telling. And to all of you, thank you. Thank you for listening. And also, for those of you who are veterans, if you are interested in telling your story, you can write to me at Marianne@Marianne.com, but also for perhaps possibly use in a further podcast where we present more veterans' voices, you can call and leave a message at 202-596-6119. Once again, 202-596-6119. You can read Laura's article and also see that phone number written below. Laura, I hope that we will continue to talk. I hope that we will continue to share stories. And once again, I'm a fan. Keep telling the truth. We need it. Thank you so much.